The storied battlefields of Gettysburg, Antietam, and Chickamauga were far removed from the banks of Buffalo Bayou, but a Civil War-era visitor would have seen plenty of Confederate gray uniforms on the streets of Houston. At the outset of the war, enlistments were quick, and a draft later followed. The vast majority of military-age Texas men served in the Army, though over two-thirds of them never left Texas or an adjoining state. Many Northerners who had moved to Texas and established business ties prior to the war chose to stay where the money was rather than take a stand for abolition and union. An army camp was established near Harrisburg, and John Bell Hood's famous 4th Texas Infantry was assembled there before being shipped off to Virginia. Also southeast of the city was Camp Lubbock, another large staging base, and along the upper reaches of Galveston Bay were Confederate Navy yards. The biggest flurry of activity in Houston was due to its status as one of the headquarters for the Trans-Mississippi Department. Officers oversaw operations across Texas and as far west as New Mexico and Arizona. Houston and Galveston were booming prior to the war, doing a thriving cotton business with the Northeast and sitting at the hub of a nascent railroad network. The advent of fighting put citizens in the two cities on edge. Lookouts sat atop Hendley's Row on the Strand and at a tower on Bolivar Peninsula. Finally, in July 1862, the USS South Carolina arrived off Galveston to enforce a federal blockade. They captured or sank 10 small sailing vessels the first week. Still, there were too few U.S. ships to watch the entirety of the Texas coastline. Shallow draft schooners tried to slip through water where the larger U.S. gunboats couldn't go. The outgoing load was usually cotton, but the potential reward was high on a return trip as well. A cargo such as the 20 tons of coffee seized in late 1862 would have brought a pretty penny in Houston, where residents were drinking ersatz Java made from burnt okra, sweet potatoes, or corn. The scarcity of goods ran prices as high as $4 a dozen for eggs, or $50 for a pair of boots. But between the gunboats, storms, fogs, and shallows, the Texas coast was littered with the wreckage of the runners. Top Houston merchants ran cotton to Mexico, and their already considerable fortunes grew even grander during the war. Banker and Mayor Thomas W. House was the top speculator in blockade runners, sometimes losing and sometimes bringing in giant profits. William Marsh Rice preferred the overland route to Matamoros. Rice was so invested in Mexico that after the death of his wife Margaret in 1863, he moved there for the duration of the war. The best-known military foray directed from Houston's headquarters was the Battle of Galveston, when General John Magruder's troops successfully snuck into the island city in the wee hours of New Year's Day 1863 and took the city back from Union occupiers. The prisoners from that battle were brought to Houston and housed in 2 warehouses that sat north of Buffalo Bayou. The enlisted men were confined to the prison compound, but the Union officers had free range of the city upon their word not to escape. The handful of captured African-American soldiers and sailors were sold back into slavery. Eventually, the prisoners were sent to the new Camp Gross near Hempstead. One of the most celebrated Confederate officers in Houston was Lieutenant Dick Dowling, a popular saloon owner in the city who had taken a band of fellow Irish immigrants and won an unlikely victory that stopped a Union assault at Sabine Pass. Though the city of Houston was never invaded during the Civil War, area citizens felt the pain of loss as hundreds of young men from the region died in battle, or more likely, succumbed to the pestilence of camp life. By late spring of 1865, many rebel soldiers in the area had seen enough, and they began to desert for home, doing considerable looting and plundering on their way out of town. Confederate General Edmund Kirby Smith, the final commander of rebel forces west of the Mississippi, oversaw the official dissolution of the last Southern Army over a month after Appomattox. Soldiers in Texas finally laid down their weapons on May 26, 1865. After signing the surrender in Galveston 1 week later, Kirby Smith fled to Mexico to avoid charges of treason. Galveston was occupied by federal troops on June 19th, and they moved into Houston a few days later. As the 34th Iowa Infantry marched into downtown, a young black cook of that outfit, a man named William, happily led the way. He was murdered in the street by a white man named Cotton.